The Sims may never look the same again, as our favorite CEO announces that generative AI is going to transform the series. Now, this honestly is an older article, but I wanted to cover it because I found it in my archives of things to cover, and we also know that different forms of AI are going to play a key role in Project Rene. However, since Sims 4 is going on for quite some time, I do think it's going to play a role potentially in Sims 4 too. Of course, there's nuance when we talk about AI. After all, there are tons of different forms and applications, and AI has actually existed, especially in the gaming industry. But I do think this report is very telling in terms of some of the changes we could see, both from a character perspective and gameplay, and also overall quality assurance as well as jobs. Now, this report says that 60% of development processes could be impacted by generative AI in the future. And this aligns with broader data stating that video game content developed with generative AI as of 2024 is a pretty small percentage, but within 5 to 10 years, it could reach about 50%. Now, we're going to talk about what Andrew Wilson specifically said, talk about how this could impact The Sims, as well as look at it from a broader perspective. Fresh from laying off 5% of EA's workforce, company CEO Andrew Wilson took the stage at Morgan Stanley Technology, Media, and Telecom Conference to espouse the benefits of generative AI for game development. Wilson said the dawn of generative AI is incredibly exciting and something EA is embracing deeply. When asked to help onlookers understand how generative AI may impact and transform games, Wilson explained the company has been using machine learning for quite some time to refine gameplay elements, such as how players run inside Madden. But looking beyond that, he said generative AI is the most exciting evolution of the tech by a fairly wide margin and is thought about internally on three core vectors: efficiency, expansion, and transformation. So efficiency, expansion, and transformation. And this might sound like PR talk, but I think this actually has some meaning here. First, let's talk about efficiency. The thing about efficiency, this is really how do we make what we do today more efficient. For anyone who knows anything about our business, it's an incredibly iterative development cycle, and incredibly time consuming, which is why games are now taking 6 or 7 years to build. We've done a study across all processes of game development. About 60% of our processes could be impacted by generative AI. Now, an example of that might be how we build a stadium in one of our sports games. That would typically take us 6 months. This past year, it took us 6 weeks. And honestly, we are already seeing this transform beyond games, of course, with EA. For example, take Inzoi. That life simulation game, although they did actually push back early access, nonetheless, the development process was pretty quick. And of course, that was helped by some AI technology, including the inclusion of some generative AI components. Now, what do they mean by expansion? Where expansion is concerned, he stated that generative AI is used to increase the number of run cycles, for example, in EA Sports. This was all done with generative AI. He explained before claiming the upswing makes the game experience more unique and more immersive. There's more personalized content for friends, and monetization is 10 to 20% greater. Now, while this isn't explained in detail, obviously, if you're speedrunning the process and potentially need less employees, you're going to also make higher profit margins. They're also arguing, though, that generative AI is going to allow for more personalization, which potentially could lead to more player engagement. Looking beyond that, Wilson also feels generative AI tools help democratize the game industry by letting billions of players create personal content. Ah yes, the good old user-generated content. We've talked about this so many times when it comes to The Sims, and obviously, especially for Project Rene, they're going to be leaning on that. We also know there's going to be a type of hub where there's going to be a shared gallery across games, and there's going to be a new tool in the gallery that does use forms of potentially generative AI to create assets. This will, of course, impact content creators, I would assume, and who can be a content creator or what that is even meaning. So overall, the bet is people can create their own content, it's going to be shared more, it's going to get more attention, and EA doesn't really have to pay extra to make those assets. Another possible change could be how NPCs behave. For example, one of the first gaming features to be transformed by generative AI is character design. First up, of course, like I said, are NPCs, the video game characters not directly controlled by players. Now again, this is a little bit different in Sims, but just think about how the townies are behaving as you're walking around. Playable characters characters or avatars, meanwhile, will benefit from generative AI by gaining greater customization. Generative AI algorithms can expand the range of available character features, allowing more customization for appearance, apparel, and so forth. Another concern, of course, with games getting bigger and bigger are the bugs that are coming out with these games, but this is where it gets really interesting. You see, if you look under EA technology, they have different patents and things they are exploring. They actually have machine learning for the demands of AAA game testing. This is supposed to improve current game testing methods. The study they used is Battlefield, which requires testing of 601 different features, amounting to about 0.5 million hours of testing if done manually. So obviously they're trying to cut back on how many hours are required for testing, and in my opinion, of course, how many people actually are employed in quality assurance. Of course, there are some challenges to this technology which are very complex to even unpack. Reinforcement learning techniques for testing aren't actually always the best or most practical solutions for game teams. Implementation actually requires deep machine learning knowledge and training, which can take a while to complete. In other words, right now it's not saying that AI is going to take over all quality assurance or testing, and honestly, a lot of these models are still very nascent. Nonetheless, there's no doubt in the future this could impact both what quality assurance looks like, who's actually employed, and games overall. And it's really complicated when we're also talking about job loss and job gain. Research as of 2023 found that generative AI will influence 4.5 times more jobs than it actually replaces. Of course, the goal would be to train people to actually leverage this AI technology, and yes, there will still need to be human beings on game development. Of course, the question is, how much are they going to lean on user-generated content? Also, how many people are going to lose their jobs over this? I'm not saying this is all a good or bad thing. This, again, like I said before, is very complex. And in case you're curious, the people most impacted by this probably will be college-educated jobs, as well as middle-class income workers. Again, this is all research. I have actually linked all the articles if you want to look in details for yourself. We can also look at other gaming companies and what EA might also try to do with The Sims or other games. For example, Ubisoft's speech-to-gesture animation could make NPCs act and react in more natural ways. In many ways, some of this AI technology has been around for some time, but just has evolved over time, and we're going to continue to see that. There are, again, differences in types of AI, how they impact jobs, and how they impact the game industry overall. And if you're like me, of course, you want to see Sims behave in more natural ways, or just honestly in more intelligent ways. And while different forms of AI can also assist with this, unfortunately, it's not always foolproof. One risk of using AI-generated NPCs, for example, is that game designers could lose control of the game narrative. So of course, this is a bigger concern for narrative-driven games. However, this still does apply even to something like Sims, because NPCs may say stuff or behave in ways that are game-breaking or breaks immersion. Creating good AI-generated NPCs that help the player are far more difficult than creating enemies that fight against you. So in this way, applying this kind of technology to The Sims, of course, is very complex. It's not simply a narrative, but you have to think about how they behave to different interactions. Already speaking, Sims is a highly complex game to make, and we've seen this with very many developers trying to actually make simulation games. It is not simple by far, because you don't have just one narrative, you have to anticipate how they're going to react to different situations, and also in accordance to their personality. Oddly, I feel like Sims 4 is mostly a step back in terms of the Sims' overall personality versus the third Sims game or the second Sims game. I cannot speak for the first Sims game. But as technology evolves, they have a chance to make things better. Now, honestly, I was hoping this would be for a next Sims game. I don't really know I feel much about Project Rene, but if they're going to keep Sims 4 going on for some time, maybe they can make some adjustments. But again, I think this is all better baked into the foundation of the game. Nonetheless, we might see some big changes in terms of autonomy, also quality assurance, and yes, a big difference in terms of the jobs that are available to game industry developers. And while our favorite CEO, Andrew Wilson, definitely is hyping up the possibilities of generative AI for all their games, there is also, of course, some pushback. One example is the former Dragon Age lead writer who pours scorn on EA's AI dream. What they took as excitement was really a veiled wail of disdain. despair. As he wrote, the allure of a spreadsheet where the labor costs actually suddenly show a teeny tiny bar compared to other bars, and a bunch of executives around a table nod and repeat. They want you to believe the devs under them are super stoked to work with generative AI in their process. I assure you, what they took as excitement was really despair, not unlike the time the team was informed of their new, really cool live service mandate. The executives heard about the new thing, and everyone, meaning all the yes men, think it's super exciting, so now they're going to parrot it. Obviously, there are definitely different opinions on this entire situation. It is definitely not specific to EA, but they have covered the use of AI technology and generative